The title of the first section of notes for today is factoring. X squared plus bx plus c. The diagram or definition that we'll use for this problem is to draw a big X, which is called a diamond, for the diamond method. We'll put the letter C on top of the X, put the letter B on the bottom of the X, and on the left and right side we'll put two number signs. We'll have to find out two numbers, which will be the answers to the questions. These two numbers have to multiply to get the top number, which is C. And these two numbers also have to add to get the bottom number, which is B. So we'll use this diagram for the questions for factoring x squared plus bx plus c. First question we'll do is x squared plus 5x plus 6. And we want to factor this question. To factor again, it's called the diamond method. You can draw a X on your paper. The top number again, we want the letter C. C is the last number in the question, which would be 6. The bottom number, which is B. B is the number in front of X, which is 5. From here, we want to find our two numbers. These two numbers again have to multiply to get the top number, and the two numbers have to add to get the bottom number. So we need two numbers that multiply to get 6, and those same two numbers have to add to get 5. Those two numbers would be 3 and 2. You could also switch them around and have 2 and 3. But again, 3 times 2 would be 6, and 3 times 2 would be 5. From here, the answer to the question. Factoring, we want two sets of parentheses. Each parentheses will have a x as the first number, since we started with x in the question. First number we had was 3, so the first parentheses will be x plus 3. Second number we found was 2. Second parentheses is x plus 2. And again, you could switch these to have x plus 2 first and x plus 3 second. But these two parentheses would be the answer for factoring this question. Factoring is the reverse of foiling. If you foiled or multiplied this out, you'd end up with x squared plus 5x plus 6. But with factoring, we can go backwards and get the parentheses. Next question. We'll have y squared plus 13y plus 36. Again, to factor these questions, first draw a x. The last number 36, which is c, goes on top of the x. The number in front of y in this case, the middle term, 13, goes on bottom of the x. And again, we want two numbers that multiply to get the top number. And those same two numbers have to add to get the bottom number. So two numbers that multiply to get 36, and those same two numbers that add to get 13. The answer to this one would be 9 and 4. 9 times 4 is 36. 9 plus 4 is 13. And our final answer, again, would be in parentheses. This time, instead of x, the question is y. So we'll have two y's in each parentheses. One number we have is 9, so y plus 9. The second number we found was 4, so y plus 4. So our final answer, y plus 9 and y plus 4. And again, you could switch these parentheses around, and that would still be correct. Last question we'll do for this section is a squared plus 9a plus 20. Again, factoring. First step for this type of factoring is to draw a big X. The last number 20, which is the letter C, goes on top. The middle number, which is also known as letter B, goes on bottom. And again, two numbers that multiply to get 20, and two numbers that add to get 9. Those two numbers would be 5 and 4. 5 times 4 would be 20. 5 plus 4 would be 9. Your final answer again should always be in parentheses when you factor. This time we have letter A. So A would be the first letter in each parentheses. And we have a positive 5 and positive 4. So that would be A plus 5 and A plus 4. The next section of notes that we'll do today, which is the last section, is more factoring. X squared plus bx plus c. These are more examples of the same type of question. First question in this section is y squared plus 2y minus 15. Again, it's in the same form as before. So to factor these, we'll draw the x. The last number, which is c, goes on top of the x. This time it has a minus sign in front. That minus sign is like a negative, so instead of 15, it'll be negative 15. The middle number b goes on bottom of the x, which is positive 2. Same steps, we need two numbers that multiply to get the top number, and also add to get the bottom number. This time, since it multiplies to be a negative, it means one number has to be negative and one number has to be positive. So two numbers that multiply to get negative 15, and when you add them together, you'll get positive 2. Those numbers would be 5 and negative 3. 5 times a negative 3 is negative 15, and 5 plus a negative 3, which is the same as 5 minus 3, would be 2. And again, your answer to the question would be in parentheses. In this case, we have y, so y in each parentheses. And our two numbers are 5 and minus 3. Plus 5 and minus 3. So your final answer, y plus 5 and y minus 3. Second question, x squared minus 8x plus 7. And again, draw the x to solve the question. The last number, positive 7, goes on top of the x. The middle number, negative 8, goes on bottom of the x. And again, we want two numbers that multiply to get positive 7, and two numbers that add to get negative 8. If numbers add to get a negative number, it means you have to have at least one negative in your answer. If they multiply to get positive 7, that means they both have to be positive or both have to be negative. The answer to this one would be negative 7 and negative 1. Negative 7 times negative 1 is positive 7. Negative 7 plus negative 1 would be negative 8. And your final answer in parentheses, this question is x, so two parentheses, minus 7 and minus 1, that would be x minus 7 and x minus 1. The last question for this section is m squared minus 3m minus 18. And again, to solve this question, draw the x. The last number, negative 18, goes on top of the x. The middle number, negative 3, goes on bottom of the x. Two numbers that multiply to get negative 18, and two numbers that add to get negative 3. Again, if it multiplies to get a negative number, that means one number has to be positive and one number has to be negative. The answer to this one would be negative 6 and positive 3. Negative 6 times 3 is negative 18. Negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3. Your final answer in factored form in parentheses, we have letter M, so M goes in each parentheses. Minus 6, positive 3, would be M minus 6 and M plus 3. And again, if you FOIL this out, like we did in the last section, you'd end up with what we started with. Factoring is the opposite of FOILing. The first section of notes for today is titled Review, Factoring, x squared plus bx plus c. First question we'll do is m squared plus 3m minus 10. Just like in the previous section, we'll solve this using the diamond method, which again, you start by drawing a big X on your paper. The last number, again, which is C, goes on top of the X, negative 10 or minus 10. The middle number goes on bottom of the X, which is positive 3. We have to find two numbers, which will be the answer to the question. Those two numbers have to multiply to get the top number, and also add to get the bottom number. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to get negative 10, and those same two numbers add to get positive 3. Again, if it multiplies to get a negative number, you know one number has to be negative and one number has to be positive. Answer to this one would be 5 and negative 2. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. 5 plus a negative 2, which is the same as 5 minus 2, would be 3. The final answer to the question, again, would be in parentheses. This question has the variable m, so we have m in each set of parentheses. Positive 5 and minus 2 are the numbers that go inside the parentheses. So our final answer, m plus 5 and m minus 2. Second question for the section is x squared minus 2x minus 24. Again, to start factoring, draw a x on your paper. The last number, negative 24, goes on top of the x. The middle number, negative 2, goes on bottom of the x. And again, we have to find two numbers that multiply to get negative 24, and those same numbers add to get negative 2. Again, if it multiplies to get a negative, it means one is positive and one is negative. Answer to this one would be 4 and negative 6. 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. 4 plus some negative 6, or 4 minus 6, would be negative 2. The answer, since we're factoring, would be in two sets of parentheses. The variable is x, and we have a positive 4 and a minus 6. So x plus 4 and x minus 6. Last section of notes for today is titled More, Review, Factoring, x squared plus bx plus c. First question we'll do is x squared plus 16x plus 55. Again, to factor, you can first draw the x on your paper. The last number, 55, goes on top of the x. The middle number, 16, goes on bottom of the x. And we need two numbers that multiply to get 55, and the same two numbers add to get 16. Those two numbers would be 11 and 5. 11 times 5 is 55. 11 plus 5 is 16. The answer again in parentheses. We have x for this problem. Positive 11 and plus 5. So x plus 11 and x plus 5. Last question we'll do for this section is y squared minus 11y plus 24. Again, to factor this question, draw the x. The last number, 24, goes on top of the x. The middle number, this time it's negative. Negative 11 goes on bottom of the x. And again, we need two numbers that multiply to get 24. And those same two numbers add to get negative 11. If it adds to get a negative, again that means one or both of the numbers have to be negative. In this case they're both negative, negative 3 and negative 8. Negative 3 times negative 8 is positive 24, and negative 3 plus a negative 8, which is the same as negative 3 minus 8, would be negative 11. The answer, we have y for this one. So two parentheses. Each one has a y. We have a negative or minus 3 and a minus 8. So y minus 3 and y minus 8. Again, if you FOIL this back out like we did in the last sections, you'd end up with what the question was originally. Factoring is the opposite of FOILing. first section of notes today is titled Factor by Grouping. Two definitions for factor by grouping. The first definition is factor. First two terms. And last two terms. The second definition that we'll need is the parentheses must match. In these questions, when we factor, there'll be four terms of factor. We'll factor the first two terms together, and we'll factor the last two terms together. When we're finished with the factoring, the parentheses that we have must match. The first question we'll do is 2m to the third power plus 6m squared plus 3m plus 9. So again, we have four terms. 2m to the third power plus 6m squared, those are our first two terms. Our last two terms are 3m plus 9. We're going to factor the first two terms by taking out the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is which number divides each of these. That's the biggest number. And also if they have variables in common, we can take those out. So our first two numbers are coefficients, 2 and 6. The greatest common factor would be 2. 2 divides into each of those. Also, they each have an m, so we can take an m out. This one has 3 m's, this one has 2 m's, so we can actually take 2 m's or m squared out of each of those. So our greatest common factor for the first two terms is 2m squared. After that, we'll put parentheses and factor out 2m squared from each of those. The two factors out. We have m to the third, which is 3m's, m squared, which is 2m's. If we take 2m's out, you'll be left with a single m from m to the third power. The plus sign comes down. If we have a 6, we're going to factor or divide out by 2. We'll be left with 3. The m squareds factor out, so you don't have any m's left on the 3. And then we'll close parentheses. We'll do the same steps for the last two terms. We have 3m plus 9. The greatest common factor, the biggest number that divides both of these, is 3 or positive 3. There's no m in this last term, so we can't factor an m out. Only a plus 3. Factor the 3 out, we're left with m. Plus sign comes down. 9, if you factor a 3 out or divide by 3, you'll have plus 3. If we go back to our definitions, the second definition is the parentheses must match. These two parentheses that we left with must be exactly the same. If they're not, you need to go back, check your work, make sure you took out the GCF. For the answer, the parentheses that match, that's your first answer. Your second parentheses, whatever's left over in front of each of the parentheses, combine those to make one parentheses. So we have 2m squared and plus 3. So our final answer, m plus 3, those are the parentheses that match, and the terms left over, 2m squared plus 3. Second question that we'll do is 10p to the third power minus 25p squared plus 4p minus 10. Again, factor by grouping, you'll always have four terms or four sets of numbers. So you can factor the first two together and factor the last two together. The greatest common factor, we have 10 and 25. 5 goes in each of those. We have p to the third and p squared. We can take p squared or 2p's out of each of those. And then the parentheses factor 5p squared out of each of the first two terms. 10 divided by 5 would be 2. P to the third, for dividing or taking away 2 p's, you'll be left with a single p. The minus sign comes down. 25 divided by 5 would be 5. And the p squareds factor or cancel out. The second two terms, we have 4 and a negative 10. Positive 2 goes into each of those. And again, we can't take a p out since the 10 does not have a p. 4 divided by 2 would be 2, and the p is left over. Negative 10 divided by 2 would be negative 5 or minus 5. Again, if you go back to the definitions, the second definition stated both parentheses must match. As long as they match, that's your first answer, 2p minus 5. And the second parentheses are the terms left over outside the parentheses. 5p squared and a positive 2. Again, just like the other factoring method, if you FOILed this out, it would go back to the original equation, but our answer in factored form is left in parentheses. The last section we'll do today is titled More, Factoring by Grouping. The first question is 27 x to the third plus 45 x squared minus 3x minus 5. Again, you can factor by grouping anytime you have 4 terms, which again are separated by plus and minus signs. To factor by grouping, factor the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. First 2 numbers we have is 27 and 45. Again, you want to factor the greatest common factor or biggest number that divides into both of them. That number would be 9. X to the third and x squared. Take out as many x's as you can. Both of them have at least 2 x's, so you can take out x squared. Then you factor or divide 9x squared from each term. 27 divided by 9 would be 3. X to the third, factoring out x squared or taking away 2 x's, and you're left with an x. The plus sign comes down. 45 divided by 9 would be 5. X squared, we're factoring out x squared, so those would cancel. Next 2 terms, we have negative 3x minus 5. The biggest number that goes into 3 and 5 would be a 1. Since they're both negative, we can take out a negative 1. And again, if we're dividing by negative 1 or factoring out negative 1, that would change to a positive 3x. Negative 5, factor out a negative 1, or divide by negative 1, that would change to a positive 5. Again, part of the definition for factoring by grouping is both parentheses must match. If they don't match, you have to go back, check the problems. If you don't take out a negative 1 here, then they won't match. But the first answer, since they match, is 3x plus 5. Second answer, the terms left over outside the parentheses, 9x squared